Hello everyone, I'm Saeed, currently a cloud network engineer at Samsara. If you've never heard of us before, we are an IoT company based out of San Francisco. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Nornir Vs Ansible, a very polarizing and divisive topic. A lot of people do have some very strong opinions, as do I, but I'm going to try my best to keep it as balanced as possible, but no promises. So quickly, just a bit about my background. I started my life off as a traditional network engineer, doing routing, switching, firewalls, mainly in data center environments. Moved on, learned a bit of Python, a bit of Ansible, some containerization, and built some CI/CD pipelines as well, doing network automation. Fast forward to today, fully focused on AWS, knee-deep in Terraform and Golang as well, and as a fully fledged cloud network engineer. So I've kind of put some of the structured learning pathways that I followed. So if you're just new, starting out, these might help you as well. So does this picture look familiar? Some of you might remember being in this position. You're a traditional network engineer, and you've just learned Python, and you have this like eureka or light bulb moment. It's a great feeling. You've just automated your first change, and you're buzzing with ideas, what you can do next. All of the mind-numbingly boring tasks you don't need to do anymore. So you're over the moon, but you start to run into some challenges. What happens when you now need to share and reuse your script? How do you manage your variables, your IP addresses? It might be tempting to initially hard code everything, but you start to run into some difficulties. What happens when you need to scale from 1 device to 10 devices to 100 devices? Is your code now going to take 10 times as long to execute? So this is something that network automation frameworks can help us with. We can break down our automation into smaller tasks. We can execute our automation concurrently against multiple devices. And lastly, it gives us a systematic approach to managing our inventory and related variables. So just get you guys involved, a quick opinion poll. Who's using Nornir at the minute? Okay. How about Ansible? Nice, okay. More Ansible. And lastly, something else, custom scripts, Salt. Oh, interesting. Cool. So if you've never used Ansible before, it's a declarative YAML-based network automation framework. We'll talk through some pros first. It's really easy to get started. So if you don't know any Python, happy days. You can really land some very quick wins. It's got a large community, meaning it's quite easy to find tutorials and get help. And you can also get enterprise support via Ansible automation platform. So there's lots of pre-built modules and filters you can use to get started. So you don't need to write your own unless you really want to. So for example, if you want to configure OSPF on a Cisco IOS router, there's a module for that. One of the biggest benefits is the built-in idempotency. What that means is essentially that no matter how many times you run your automation or your playbook, you're still going to have the same end state. So random example, you want to push a VLAN to a few devices at different sites. Ansible's only going to make the change on the devices that don't already have this particular VLAN. Moving on to some cons, Ansible is fantastic for simple things, but as you kind of ramp up the complexity of the use case, working in complex logic can be really painful and verbose, and it kind of turns into rope to tie yourself with. Troubleshooting can be quite complicated as well. So anyone who's used Ansible long enough can remember this massive wall of red text that you hit with, and you're not too sure where exactly the error is. And lastly, it can be very slow for some tasks compared to Nornir. Moving on to Nornir. So if you've not used it before, it's a community-driven, pluggable, pure Python network automation framework. Pros, you don't need to learn a DSL or a domain-specific language like you do with Ansible. With Ansible, you can kind of feel like you're using YAML as a programming language, which it really isn't. You could argue there's easier debugging and troubleshooting. So I would argue the Python error traceback is a lot nicer than Ansible's. You have a much larger ecosystem of tools you can use, PDB, maybe rich inspect, and significantly better performance for really large inventories, up to 100 times faster. Lastly, you can use the standard Python toolset. So think PyLint, PyTest, Black, Rich. And it's really, PyTest is really extensible. It's quite easy to mock network devices in Python, whereas with Ansible, you're kind of a bit more limited to things like Molecule for testing. On the other hand, Nornir definitely does have like a much steeper learning curve. So you do need some familiarity with basic Python concepts. I think variables, functions, nested data structures. And I've found that beginners can find how Nornir presents its results a little bit confusing at first. Another thing is no enterprise support. You're kind of limited to like community-based support via Slack and GitHub, although I've never really had issue with that personally. There is a smaller community. All that really means is, maybe less learning resources, training compared to Ansible. And lastly, there's no built-in idempotency, although it's, for simple use cases, it's not that difficult to build this in yourself. So a very simple example, if you've never used either before, so we're just kind of configuring an IP address on a Cisco router interface. On the left-hand side, you've got an Ansible playbook on YAML, and then the equivalent on the right-hand side in Nornir in Python. So which one should you use? I wish it was a simple answer. There's a lot of different considerations you should take into account. Firstly, scale. How many devices are you automating against? 10, 100. If you're automating against a large number of devices, maybe consider Nornir for the better performance. I can certainly remember Ansible playbooks running across a large number of devices, taking hours to execute. Maintainability, what's your team's skill set? So are you the only person in the team that is comfortable with Python? If that's the case, then God forbid you get hit by a bus, then your team may struggle to keep the ball rolling. On the other hand, if if there's several people on the team that are fairly comfortable with Python, Nornir may make a bit more sense. Scope. So are you only automating network devices, or have you got servers in there too? Ansible is fantastic with Linux, and if other teams in your organization are already using Ansible, then it might make sense to go for that option. Complexity. Ansible is fantastic for, you're pushing a few lines of config to multiple boxes. It's great for that. But as you kind of ramp up the complexity of the use cases, the pains also ramp up. And think of it like this. If your use case is so complex now that you need to break out into writing your own custom Ansible modules and filters, which are obviously written in Python, then maybe consider writing it in a Python-based framework like Nornir in the first place. Support. So how important is enterprise support for you and your org? So if your organization is a financial one, maybe SLAs, strict SLAs for support are really important. So Ansible can have that, so maybe that's a better option. Whereas with Nornir, you're more limited to your community-based support via Slack and GitHub. Lastly, Nornir is just another Python library import, so that brings a lot of flexibility. So it can be easily integrated with custom web frameworks like Flask and Django. So that's something we did at a previous organization where we were able to automate complex customer migrations by serving web form on a custom dashboard in Flask. It had a big impact because we were able to save on team overtime costs, completely removing the network team from the process. And I'd also like to share another interesting use case. So in the previous role, we utilized both Ansible and Nornir in tandem for a complex network testing project at scale. So Nornir's flexibility and speed, it allowed us to create a custom network test framework that carried out over 7,000 tests across multiple vendors, Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco, Juniper, and also some VoIP devices. So Ansible was used to collect some data from the Linux shell of some devices and then kind of pass that back into our Nornir PyTest-based framework. And I love to poke a bit of fun at Ansible, so this is someone who tried to use Ansible to push out a change against 100 devices. There's only so much you can cram into a 10-minute talk, so I have got some blog posts that you can kind of go through if you want to dive in a bit deeper. And I'd like to recommend some learning resources that I've used. I have no affiliation to any of these folks, but ones that I've used and I find great, Kirk Byers courses on Ansible and Nornir. Packet Coders have some amazing content on network automation as well, some courses. Both of those are paid, but if you want something free, Packet Switch is also a fantastic resource. That's all we've got time for. Thank you very much.
Well done.